Hey there, Ken Zorovich, NFM Lending. I've got the pleasure of chatting with one of the best attorneys in town, Linda Liang. And Linda, tell us a little bit about the specialty and law that you practice. And specifically, why don't we jump into a topic today that you want to touch on?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. And I think this is a great idea to talk about what we are concerned today. A little bit background about me. I have been actually immigration attorney for the longest time. And I helped lots of business entrepreneurs to move from overseas to US with investments, to
Right.
open up the businesses, and also help with a lot of U.S. citizens to immigrate their spouse from overseas as well. Needless to say, I deal with a lot of money issue.
Sure.
So a lot of business aspect to the immigration aspect. So one of the biggest one is, of course, the marriage between U.S. citizen and their spouse or spouse to be overseas, fiance. And we strongly recommend prenuptial agreement because a
Got
lot
it.
of times they're not the first marriage. And there's a
Right.
huge difference between their even either age or earning capabilities.
Right.
And so at the core of the core problem is the homestead, right? USCIS, the immigration, which is more and more strict nowadays, wants to see the couples live like a couple. They want to see there's a determination into the marriage. So one of the strongest evidence we can provide is to add the spouse name to the residence.
Got it.
Yeah. So
It's funny, we see it a lot in our industry too, and I think what people don't understand about how at least the state of Florida law works, and it could be even with other states, but the assumption of how a couple operates being married, right? Like they make certain assumptions like you're living together, you're doing certain things together. Like all of this has to happen. And so when people don't realize that and they might want to live a life a certain way, we run into that a lot where we're like, well, yeah, they don't agree with how that's going to work because we have certain assumptions that we make in the state of Florida. And I take it that's kind of what's happening a bit with the immigration and having a spouse that's coming over. They're saying, hey, we expect that you're going to live a certain lifestyle according to what we consider a married couple, and that would include having them be a part of the homestead.
yes, yes. It's about the intent. The intent. They want to say, I want to see the genuine marriage. It's the marriage not just get into and say, okay, we live apart and yeah, we'll give that a try. We basically date. We're basically
Right.
dating.
Right.
So, and yeah, they just want to show the evidence of the intent, which is the hardest thing to do. Yeah, and people have to make it. This is the biggest decision for a person to make. However, it's always hard for us to give them because they're too complicated. It's so complicated. Involves the rest of their lives. If they're
Yeah.
so, yeah, this refinance is an issue. Survivorship is the issue, which we have to give it explanation, give a full explanation to them in prenuptial agreement about the liabilities. What do you think? What's the
Yeah.
liabilities?
So from a liability perspective, yeah, like so actually let's look at this from almost like a generic case, right? So let's
Mm,
just say we have someone who has an established business here of some type. They're going to marry someone that's from overseas. So step 1 is your recommendation is they get a prenuptial agreement,
yes.
right? Okay. Now, in that prenuptial agreement, do they need to specify anything when it comes to the real estate?
Yes. Homestead right.
Okay. So they need to clarify who's going to have ownership of that property, at least according to the prenuptial agreement, right? Or who can benefit from maybe the proceeds from that property, right? Like that's kind of how the prenuptial agreement would be set up. Is that your recommendation?
Well, prenuptial agreement, yeah, you have to talk about a lot of things. Most important thing, the biggest financial part is the residence. And residence, there are two ways. One way is just ownership with survivorship.
Right.
So, meaning, if one spouse passed away, the new spouse, the US citizen spouse passed away, and the new spouse will own this, leaving to their kids.
Yeah.
So their
Got
kids
it.
will be pissed.
Got it. Yes.
Or say that was going to remain the personal property. However, there's a homestead right, meaning if the US citizen spouse passed away, overseas spouse has the very right to live there until the end of her life.
Got it. Got it. Okay. So they would get this prenuptial agreement, they would spell those details out, but once the fiance comes over to the US and now they're here, immigration would want to see that they're added to homestead as part of intent. Is that correct? Like to be added to title to the property.
Not particular, but my experience, once you add it, they're going to give you a yes, because that's the boldest, that's the step to go to show their determination of marrying this person instead of I'm going to divorce her in a couple of years after
Right.
she gets her green card.
Right.
She or he, right?
Right. Now, once they're on homestead, though, they're technically an owner of this property. So, with the
Yeah.
prenuptial agreement, I guess, does that protect the original owner of the property when it comes to maybe proceeds from a sale of that property? Would they still be eligible for those proceeds, or do they now have to share in those proceeds because that person's been added to homestead?
The homestead is tricky. Homestead on the legal part, once you're added on homestead as marital couple, you are done. You're done.
Right.
That's a survivorship, right? So that's that woman's house. However, in reality, nobody pays off that residence. In reality, that comes to you. That's why I wanted to ask you this question: is
Mhm.
in reality, the house is not paid in full.
Right.
Equity in that house is sometimes is very low. So it comes to, oops, when you take this homestead, you pay a lot. You still pay a lot of mortgage. And also in the meantime, my question for you is, do they have to inform the bank instead of just do a quick claim? They have to inform the bank and do a refinance, don't they?
Yeah, so here's what happens with that. So let's just say that this fictitious couple that we have, the American citizen has passed away and the loan was in their name, and now the spouse who came from another country is living in the property, but they're on title to the property, right? Because they've been added for homestead purposes. So from a lending side, there are ways to find out if someone passes away. It takes some time if that information is not brought to the forefront, right? Like if that information is not shared with the servicing department, and the servicing department's who you pay your mortgage to, if
Yeah.
they're not notified, there is a way of finding that out because death certificates are public records, right? So they can go and find out. Now, it'll take a little time,
Mm-hmm.
right? But they can eventually find out. And so once they find out, they're going to say, hey, we've got to do something here, because the problem is, even if someone has the best intentions of wanting to continue to pay that mortgage, the liability is not in their name. And that's what our industry thrives off of, is liability, right? Like we need to know we've got recourse against someone to pay back this loan. If there's a loan in your name and I'm in the house paying on it, like they can't necessarily come after me for that money if I don't pay it, right? Now they
Yes.
can come after the house at some point, but they can't necessarily come after me. And banks and lenders always want recourse, right? So
Mm-hmm.
what they would say is, what I always tell people, the best course of action is let the servicing department know, because if they think you're doing something nefarious, they're gonna make life miserable for you downstream, right? Like they're going to try and not be cooperative downstream. But if you bring it to their attention and say, look, here's the deal, my spouse has passed away, the loan was in my spouse's name, what can we do? They're going to say, okay, great, you can obviously continue paying, we would love that, and as long as you pay and we give you a certain time frame to either refinance or sell, then we can kind of start fresh here. You can either get a new loan in your name, or you can sell and pay us off, and you can take the proceeds and go about your way, right? So one of those two outcomes has to happen. This happened to a woman I know not too long ago, and they waited about a year and a half to notify the servicing department. It got slipped through the cracks. The servicing department didn't know, and it's hard. I know they check public records, but they probably don't do it monthly. They probably do it on certain occasions and just kind of do like, hey, is there anyone that is in our database that maybe passed away or matches up to, someone? But if you wait that long, you can almost get to the point of no return, right? And if the loan isn't paid or there's any misstep in how payments are made, and maybe it's just a simple mistake, you can really have problems to where they want to foreclose on you and not work with you on the situation. So I always advise you should tell them right away so that you can then work together to come up with a solution. But yes, even if you're just homesteaded or on title, it just means
Hmm.
that you have ownership. And the way I always explain it, because I'll have times where spouses take out a loan in one name, but not the other, but they both are on title. And the best way to understand it is whoever's on the loan is responsible for the money. Okay. So they're going to come after you for the money, but whoever's on title is going to get kicked out of the house when they go to foreclose. So even if the loan is in my name, but we go to foreclosure, they're just going to come after me for the money, but they're still going to kick my spouse out of the house as well, right? Like
They
just
are
because
going to
they're on
foreclose
title
that
doesn't mean that they're protected from it.
because they have right to, that's as a security right. They have the
Yep.
right to foreclose on the house and you have no place to go anyways.
Yeah, for
You're gonna,
sure.
so the survivorship is not really meaningful.
And so the homestead part is what's really interesting in all this that you talk about, because yes, it would make sense to have your spouse added to a property that is homesteaded.
Hmm.
But I'd be curious to know if the prenuptial agreement can override that ownership of the property from being proceeds. Now, I know it's not considered a marital asset since it wasn't acquired at the time or, after they were married. I think assets only after the time that someone's married is a marital asset, correct?
Well, you can name the moon as marital assets.
Oh, good. All right. So then that doesn't matter, right? Like that
And
part
the
doesn't
thing is,
matter.
the law by default, if you don't have a prenuptial agreement, the law will say, okay, everything you marry after marriage, it's marital assets.
Right.
That's the thing.
Right.
So, but if you add the spouse name onto that, basically you are giving the house away. It's a
Yes.
survivorship. That's pretty thing. It's a pretty harsh thing sometimes for unstable marriage.
Yes.
The thing is, if they add a name, I suggest them to go and talk to you, right? So let's go and talk to them and try to add a name on it. Is there any risk of raising their rates or what's going to happen if just add a name onto a person's mortgage?
Yeah, so there's really no change in someone's mortgage by adjusting title. Like I could be on title to a home and be on the mortgage to that home. And then I could add you, I could add my brother, I could add my friend, I could add multiple people to title of the property, but it doesn't necessarily change anything about my mortgage. Right. So a good way to look at it is if you want to be on the mortgage, you have to be on title. But if you're on title, you don't have to be on the mortgage.
Yeah, that's understandable. It's because they're separate instrument. But
Yeah.
the thing is that advisable for them to add another spouse name onto the mortgage?
So if they did add them to the mortgage, okay, it would mean taking out a brand new loan and adding them to the mortgage. But the benefit of that happening is should something happen and one of the spouses passes away suddenly or early, they don't necessarily have to take drastic action because they're the other person's still on that loan, so there's recourse, right? Meaning like they don't have to sell or run off and refinance just because a spouse was on there with them. That's the key part of it, is that if you do add someone to the loan and something happens to you down the road and you pass away suddenly, at least that loan will still stay intact without having to force the spouse to make very rash decisions of either selling or refinancing, right? Because they're on the loan already, right? So as long as they're on the loan already, nothing would happen in the event of the other spouse passing away. Whereas if they're not on the loan, then yes, something has to take place. They either have to refinance, sell the property, do something. But in those cases, no, they wouldn't have to do anything in order to make that happen.
Okay, so yeah, probably we're talking about the death as the end to
Hmm.
the marriage. What about the still get a divorce?
So if they get a divorce and one spouse, or say both spouses are on the loan, right? Generally, the divorce decree and sort of the agreement that gets made between both spouses will override even who's on the mortgage. So, like our industry, tends to respect those legal outcomes, even if nothing changes on the loan. So, for example, a couple's on there, they're both on the loan, and they get a divorce, they can have in writing that spouse A is responsible solely for the mortgage, solely for the monthly payments, and they're going to keep the interest in the property. Spouse B is not responsible for it. And I've seen this happen before to where spouse B is never removed from that loan and it still shows up on their credit. And we have to get that documentation to then show, oh, okay, this is on their credit, but legally they're not obligated to it because it was agreed upon in the courts. So now the spouse B runs the risk that spouse A doesn't pay it and it hurts their credit, but we can exclude that mortgage from their ratios and from their ability to go qualify for another mortgage as long as we have the supporting legal documents to back it up. So it's not necessarily a situation where they have to get removed from the loan. I think it would be a good idea because you want to just kind of get freedom from like sort of like break off and be financially independent from it, but at least in the short term, that's how that would be set up.
Yeah, but the bank like that idea because the when bank needs to lend somebody, don't they just feel like, oh, two people working, all right, probably the rate can be lower. Now it's only one person, and that person might be disabled or might be older.
Right.
You think the bank will not have an issue of like separating you guys?
Well, I wouldn't say that they won't have an issue, but what the overriding protection in all of it is the property, right? Like that's really the overriding protection in all of it is that if this doesn't work out with the remaining spouse, they're going to foreclose on it and be able to take back the property, sell it, and get their money back. Right. Like that's still the overriding protection in all of it. But yes, to your point, I wouldn't say that they're thrilled not having recourse against two people versus now one, but the property still being in play is what probably lets them sleep well at.
So the logic is once the loan has been approved, so the bank is really look at the value of the property, real property itself. Who's
Yeah,
really
that's
the
always an
loan
important
document
piece.
is not really
Because you want to know what's something that I don't think people understand about foreclosure. Because I've had plenty of people tell me this before where they're like, what does the bank care? I owe 50%, based off the value of my property, like my property's worth 500,000. I only owe 250,000. What does the bank care? Why don't they just give me the loan? I mean, they could take my place, foreclose on it, and then get their money back. What people don't understand is two things. One, the foreclosure process in the state of Florida has to go through the courts. It's
right.
not as easy as just having like an officer of the law show up and nail like a sign to your front door that this has now been foreclosed on. Like some states they allow you to do, right? Like everything's done through the courts. And when it's done through the courts, it takes time and time is money. And then
And a
you
lot of
don't, yeah. And then you don't know if anyone's maintaining this property that you're going to potentially now foreclose on. Right. And then on top of that, now once you're allowed to finally get it from the homeowner and you've now foreclosed, you got to go sell it. And if they, damage the property on the way out, that'll make it even harder. And maybe you have to put some money into it, or maybe you're just going to discount it to try and get it sold fast. But like the time that it takes is what people don't understand. The cost of foreclosure is what people don't understand. And to the point that really what a bank wants to do is just get its money back. So if they owe 250,000 to the bank, they just want to get the 250,000 back. They don't necessarily care if they're going to make a profit off of a sale. That's not the way they look at it. It's we're leasing this money. How quickly can we get it back to us? Right? Like they just want to get that 250,000 back. They're not hoping to sell that place for 500,000 and make 250,000. You know what I mean? Like that's just what I think people don't understand a lot of times. The way banks look at it is they don't look at it as now it's a profit scheme because they're not real estate holding entities. They're not trying to be realtors and sell prop. They got to go hire people to do all that. They got to pay fees. They got to pay costs to get that money back. And that's all just another barrier that they have to get through, right? So when it comes to that, that's a big part of it of, like you said, the recourse, right? Having the recourse, yes, they'd prefer to, but that property always remains the kind of the break glass in case of emergency. If everything goes south, then at least we know we can go after the property.
So what I'm hearing is that it's okay for them to have both names added to the title and leaving the mortgage intact And then
Yes.
the marriage ended, they can have addendum to their, or have a decree, or yeah, marriage decree will override some part of the loan document or something.
Yes.
I can assume that loan, so that's assumption. Somebody, you finally get that the house and you pay the loan, and you can just assume the loan on the house and you pay for it.
Well, here's the thing. If the person is not on the loan, they would have to do something based off that divorce. Like they'd potentially have to refinance the person off of there because they could only assume it if they're already on there. Does that make sense? Like if
Really?
they're if both spouses are on there, yes, I can assume ownership or liability of that other spouse's part of the mortgage. But if it's only one spouse on the loan, the spouse that's not on the loan can't just take over the mortgage based off of the divorce decree. They'd
So
they'd
bank have
have to
to
put
say
in
yes.
verbiage of either refinancing or selling. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. It's like you can't marry me with marry the bank with
Right.
the borrowers. I just by divorcing. I said, okay,
Right. Right. So we see it. We
you're
see in like
first.
yeah, we see in a lot of divorce paperwork where if it's a situation like that, there'll be like a time frame and they'll say like, okay, spouse A is the only one on the mortgage, spouse B wants the property, spouse B has 120 days to refinance the loan into their name, take spouse A off the property, maybe give them some money that they have in in equity. And if they can't, then they have to sell the property, right? Like if they
Mm.
can't accomplish that, then they've got to sell it and it just has to be liquidated.
Okay, now it comes to me. So it's more important. Yes, we have to warn our clients when they get into enter into marriage, but we have to let them know there's a part of refinance.
Hmm.
You have to consider refinance before you consider divorce. You
Yeah.
better get your loan approved first, and then
Yeah.
you sign a decree. Otherwise, it takes forever.
Yeah, for sure. And there's probably some ways that I'm sure like real estate attorneys for title purposes, like if I was divorced and I now was marrying someone from overseas, but I wanted to make sure my kids got the house after I died, right? And I put this new spouse on as homestead on the property. There's probably some instruments they could do that would go to like to my kids in the event that I passed away, right? There's probably some things they could probably work out in title or a will or something that would protect them, I would imagine, even if they added them to title to the property.
Yeah, that is the tough part if it's a homestead.
Right.
Homestead is really tough because homestead, even the government cannot take that away from the
Yeah.
overseas spouse. So that's
But
because that's where they live.
but if you think about it, that's probably why they expedite those immigration docs faster, right?
That is right. That is true.
Because they know the financial commitment that's being made
Hmm.
beyond just the love.
Exactly.
They know
Exactly.
the financial commitment being made versus someone not being willing to add them to title to the property is more common of maybe someone that's trying to beat the system or, bring someone over that they are going to divorce in a year or something. You know what I mean? Like,
You hit the nail on the head. The U.S. government's most concern is you're going to be on the government assistance program. So you
right,
come in, you get married, and then 2 months later, it's like, whoops, it didn't work out,
right,
and you're not leaving, and then you go into the hospital, or you have no place to go.
right,
Section 8 is going to take care of you. Medicaid is going to take care of you. You go to
right.
hospital. I have a client who just is saying, I went to the hospital. 15 days later, $750,000 bill goes to Medicaid. That's just how it is. So the U.S.
Right.
government made people sign the paper which they don't enforce. So on this side, I know the logic. They're saying, okay, add the spouse name to the homestead, we're okay. So it's just, but as an attorney, I have to always think for them. This is the risk you are taking, and all aspects you have to think it through before you really take the step.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
should I just ask them to come to you before they unfortunately decided to get a divorce to talk about refinance or
Well, you know what? I think it's important. I think one aspect that doesn't get utilized enough by divorce attorneys or people giving any legal advice to clients, that maybe they give them legal advice in their business and now they're going to go get divorced. I think having a conversation with someone like a mortgage loan officer like myself before they get deep into it, because I see a lot of times like things that people make mistakes about that hurt them post divorce, that they could have prevented prior to. Like, for example, there are times where people just stop paying on certain bills out of spite, out of, just not thinking that they need to pay them now and they'll figure something out later. Like, once they start hurting their credit and going delinquent on things, there's just isn't going to be a lot of options for what they can do after the divorce, or even if they wanted to remove a spouse from a loan or get on a loan and take it over and let the other spouse off. Like, if you just start sandbagging your accounts and your credit and going delinquent on stuff, like none of that's going to be possible. So you really need to understand, I say you meaning like a person needs to understand what steps do they need to take? What are some do's and don'ts when they're going to go down this road of how not to make a small problem mushroom into something bigger that's going to impact you financially even post divorce. So I think that's the benefit, is you're already planning so many other things out. Why not plan for how your finances are going to work after the fact, right?
that's exactly what I want to talk to you today about, talk to you today because I unfortunately in immigration because it's second at least it's a second marriage.
Right.
And a lot of them ended up in divorce. That's just the sad fact. And that's what I'm saying, to protect the best interest of my clients, I want to, help them to prepare for the worst. And marriage ends two way. One is the death of a spouse, then you have to have estate planning. And then what's going to happen? That's in prenuptial agreement there. And then secondly, a divorce. Divorce people usually only talk about financial support, how much spousal support you give it to me. Yeah, it's the child support and all that, right? So the regular thing or inheritance, right? But they barely talk about think about is, okay, on paper, I own this house. What if I would get a divorce
Yeah.
or pre-divorce separation? Like you're saying, one spouse cannot pay. I have no place to go what I'm gonna do. So where's my cash? Where's my
Yeah.
way of living together, living? So that type of thing. That's why I just like I want to be precautious
Yeah.
to learn out how we should guide our clients to prepare for the rainy days.
Yeah. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, I think it's a conversation. And that's the thing. It just has to be a conversation. It's not like they have
Mm,
to come apply for a mortgage or submit financials to us. It's like, no, let's just have a conversation about this so you can understand what could happen. And let's
yeah.
just map out all the potential scenarios of like A, B, and C could all take place. So then if you do get in that position, you're not surprised by it. You're like, oh yeah, we had that conversation with Ken and Linda, and we knew this could happen, and here's what we need to do. And that's
Mhm.
always the benefit of going through and taking the time before they get too deep into it.
That's a great idea. That's a great idea. Yeah, we need a plan, give them a blueprint of every scenario so they know they're prepared. If anything happens, they don't have to be so like surprised, like what am I
Right.
gonna do now? So yeah, be great.
Right. Yeah.
Awesome. Now I know what to do. I will ask them to talk to you.
There we go.
Okay, great.
Awesome, Linda. This was productive.
I know, I know. I learned a lot myself. Thank
Well,
you.
listen, it was great speaking with you. We'll do it again soon.
Okay, we'll do.
All
All
right.
right. Take
Thanks.
care. Have a good one.